Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. In a little more than a week, vote-by-mail ballots will be sent out, and Floridians will begin making some critical decisions. And perhaps no decision will be as consequential as the vote on Amendment 4, which would eliminate Florida's 6-week abortion ban and reinstate a woman's ability to have an abortion up until viability, which is essentially 24 weeks. In other words, it would return Florida to what this state was like under Roe v. Wade before it was struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, Florida is one of 10 states that have abortion on the ballot this November, but while most states only require a simple majority, or 50%, to pass, Florida requires 60% approval. That's more than any other state and is an incredibly high threshold to reach. But apparently, that's not good enough for Governor Ron DeSantis, who is leading the charge against Amendment 4. He is using the state's official healthcare website to spread what his critics argue is misinformation about the amendment and the effects of the 6-week abortion ban that he pushed through the legislature, rather than just speak out against it, which is his right, and then let the people decide on their own. He is using state resources to mislead voters. In response, the Florida ACLU has filed a lawsuit against the state demanding they take down the site and stop using taxpayer dollars to sway voters. A hearing is scheduled for Wednesday in Tallahassee, and I recently spoke to Michelle Morton from the ACLU about why they brought this lawsuit.
What we saw was happening was that the state was interfering with Floridians' right to amend the Constitution, right? So Amendment 4 was proposed by Florida citizens. They have the right to propose amendments to the state constitution and to have a fair vote on those amendments. And this right is such an important check on the government's power. So then when that same government steps in and starts spreading misinformation about the amendment, that is clearly violating, Floridians' right to amend their constitution.
So you believe that the governor's actions and the actions by the state agency violate Florida's constitution?
Exactly. So Floridians have this right to amend the constitution. It is a check on government's power. And so when politicians aren't representing their constituents, those constituents can bring an important issue to Floridians for a vote. And that's exactly what's happened with Amendment 4. The state passed this extreme abortion ban, despite polling at the time showing that most Floridians did not want that. And Amendment 4 would reverse that and put a limit to government interference with abortion. So now the government is interfering with that right, or that vote. And so it's fighting to maintain this power over healthcare decisions. And in doing so, the state agency is using resources we as Floridians have trusted them with to campaign against an amendment proposed by its citizens. So this is a direct infringement on Floridians' right to propose and vote on these amendments.
So the hearing that is coming up this Wednesday, what are you asking for in that hearing for a judge to do?
So all we're asking for is a temporary injunction to pause things, take the misinformation down, stop spreading misinformation through advertisements while the case is proceeding, to ensure that the sponsor's right to propose this amendment is protected in this time, as is the voter's right to vote on the amendment free of this misinformation.
And just to be clear, you're not saying that Governor Ron DeSantis, if he wants to go out and campaign against the amendment, if he wants to go out and personally stand at a podium and cite and spread misinformation, he can do that. What you're saying is that you cannot use the resources of the government, the resources of the taxpayers of Florida, to campaign against a constitutional amendment that its citizens are bringing.
Right. The ACLU fights for everyone's right to free speech. And this isn't about a single person. If anything, it's about the countless women and doctors who've been standing up and saying this is how this current extreme ban is impacting their lives. And then having the state come back in and say, no, it's not, and calling them liars. So it's not about a single person. People can say whatever they want to say, but at the end of the day, there needs to be a fair vote on this amendment.
And you think using state resources to essentially tell women that they're lying about their experiences, that's a step too far for you and the ACLU.
Absolutely. So, the government's misinformation campaign, it's furthering the cruelty of the current ban. So even as more and more women, husbands, doctors are going on record to share the ways the ban is impacting them, the government is using its platform to deny these very real, heartbreaking lived experiences. They can't justify the harm of the current law, so they're just denying it and lying about Amendment 4. But this has been going on for years now, that doctors have been sounding the alarm about the impact of these bans and their ability to provide care. And women are telling the state this, that they're being turned away from emergency rooms during medical crises, that they're being forced to carry doomed pregnancies to term and watch helplessly as their children suffer. And the state could fix this. Let's be clear. They could revise the law to make it clear, but they haven't. Instead, they're trying to mislead people, say, no, this isn't happening. Don't listen to these women and these doctors. Listen to the government and let us keep this power to decide when someone should be able to get an abortion.
Has there been a case like this before? I'm trying to remember going back through, we've had lots of constitutional amendments over the years. Have we ever seen anything similar where the governor's office or one of his agencies put out an entire website, ran a PR campaign as well, using taxpayer dollars to run commercials that essentially try to undermine the vote of the people?
Certainly not. This is, as far as we know, this is unprecedented to have use the power and the budget, frankly, of the state to attack a citizen's initiative. We've never seen this before, and it's not a good precedent. There's a reason we have this right, and we need to protect it. We do not need the government out there spreading misinformation to put their thumb on the scale on these amendments. But ultimately, the power belongs to Floridians. Each of us are going to have the right to vote yes on Amendment 4 and end the extreme ban and fight back against all of this government interference.
I also spoke to State Senator Lauren Book, who's been leading the efforts to pass Amendment 4. I asked for her reaction to what DeSantis is doing.
Look, I think that it's very clear that the administration is extremely concerned because they know and understand that a great portion of the population, over 60%, believe that Amendment 4 needs to pass. And they're doing anything that they can to really scare people into not wanting to support this amendment. Really, even with that, the website, you even think, and a colleague of mine, Senator Pizzo, was so correct, it's doxing. They even put up donors to Amendment 4 on this website. It's bananas to think the lengths that this administration is going to try to get people to vote no on Amendment 4, when we know the majority of Floridians support Amendment 4 and want to ensure that women have medical freedom in this state.
When I was talked earlier to the attorney for the ACLU that's filing suit, one of the points that she raised was the notion that here you have the state government essentially telling women that the experiences and the stories they have aren't true, that they're lying to the public if they say the following things take place. It's not just that this is part of a campaign. This is the government interfering even more directly in a process that is supposed to be the way the public amends its constitutions. This is the government interfering with that process. Do you agree?
Absolutely. 100%. I think it's time that politicians take a step back and allow the people to decide what happens. What is the fear here of allowing our population that are very smart, educated people? Floridians are very special, wonderful people who know what they're doing, who know what they believe, and have that right to exercise their beliefs, their wants, to put it and enshrine it in our Constitution. I don't understand the fear of it. I don't understand why the administration and the right are so afraid of allowing Floridians to go make their voices heard on Election Day. It blows my mind. It's scary, and it is an extreme overreach.
We will continue the conversation with Senator Book as we get into what the amendment actually does. That's next. Welcome back. We are continuing our conversation with State Senator Lauren Book about Amendment 4, which would do away with Florida's 6-week abortion ban and return to the state what it was like before Roe v. Wade was struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court. In addition to Governor DeSantis using the state's official healthcare website and taxpayer dollars to campaign against the amendment, he has also been very public about what he says is an ongoing criminal investigation into how signatures were gathered that put the amendment on the ballot. I asked Book if we have ever seen anything like this before from a governor.
It's actually unprecedented. You've seen and heard some of the different supervisors of elections come out and say, this has never happened. This is completely unprecedented. I think Supervisor Arrington in the middle of the state in Orlando said this is something that has never, ever happened. She's never seen it before. And so I think that is indicative of, again, the lengths that this administration is going to try to stop this initiative from being voted on by the people of Florida. Again, never happened, never a piece apart. Ballots are being printed right now. We're moving into early voting very soon. We have 40-something days until the election. It is unprecedented.
This has actually gone to the level where you have law enforcement knocking on people's doors who may have signed a petition and being questioned about the signature on the petition. Does that have a potential chilling effect on people turning out to vote?
I think that it's scary. I think that is scary for people. We've talked about this elections police before. People should really be thinking about and looking at what this administration and what the government is doing here. The amount of overreach in the 3 minutes or 5 minutes that we've been talking right now that exists, whether it's the elections police and people going and physically knocking on the doors of people who have signed petitions, to the doxing and illegal information that's being posted online, potentially criminal by ACA. It is mind-boggling the lengths that is being attempted here to really stop, again, people from exercising their right to vote. It's bananas to think about where we are.
Are you aware of anyone or any evidence that there is actual criminality here in the way any of the petitions were gathered?
In all of the reporting that we have seen so far, they have said that it's not linked with Amendment 4. But look, I'm a person who believes in law and order. And if something was done incorrectly, those people, those individuals, those organizations have to face the music. But what we know to be true is that we have worked very hard, secured more petitions than anyone else, anytime else, over the amount that were needed. They were verified, passed muster with the Supreme Court, and are on the ballot here. And so I think, again, if there was some wrongdoing that is or has occurred, that will be brought to justice, and those things will be figured out.
I want to sort of go to some of the misinformation that seems to be spreading about this and clarify what the amendment actually does. You know, we're seeing one of the issues that I know has been raised against the amendment is, well, it's too short, it's too easy to read, there isn't all these definitions, and it isn't longer. How do you address that? I mean, I guess if you had multiple definitions all throughout the ballot language, then they would have criticized it for being too long. Now they're criticizing it for being too short. Should there have been definitions, though, on terms of viability and those other words that they have in there, defining a physician, all those sorts of things?
Well, I don't want to, go back to, I know we don't call it Twitter anymore, or X. I know that it can't be as long as a tweet, but this is all language that's been approved by our Supreme Court. People know and understand. They understand what this means. They understand viability. We've had arguments with the Supreme Court. This language has been approved. And I want to make sure that we're also very clear on one thing. While the language is short, I'm going to read a sentence that the right fights very hard about. This amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion. We're very, very clear. The language is short, yes. But let's be very clear. We're clear about what we're doing.
Let me interrupt you there, because they make the distinction that notification is different than requiring.
Again, I'm going to read the sentence in its entirety. This amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion. I don't believe that weakens what we have on the books. It does not change the legislature's ability, again, to require notification of parents. We don't believe that touches that. They continue to argue that. And again, I believe that the people of Florida are a very smart group of people that can make these decisions for themselves. And if they feel that perhaps they are correct in their interpretation of this language, then they vote no. But I know that over 60% are going to vote yes, because they believe that women should have medical freedom.
And the issue of who can basically claim to be a physician, who can provide that medical insight in terms of the life or danger to the mother. They've suggested that it could be any number of people who aren't necessarily doctors.
Yes, we've heard and seen quite a bit of ridiculousness on that side, arguing that, you could claim you have a headache and receive an abortion. That's just not the case. That doesn't happen now. They want to diminish mental health and mental health needs. Again, you and I have talked many, many, many times, and many of your viewers have talked to me outside of this forum and seen me in the public and start talking about mental health issues, whether it's a sexual assault. I have family members who are on medication, psychotropic medication that's not compatible with pregnancy, and they'd like to stay alive, take their medication, and keep the children that they do have. But they don't want to consider those things. Nobody, let's be very clear, politicians should not stand in the way of a woman's right to decide what happens to her, and should not be in the room when making medical health care decisions with a doctor. It shouldn't be the case. And come November, it won't be.
Rick Scott, others talking about how this amendment would allow abortions into the 9th month of a pregnancy. First off, I always imagine how insulting that must sound to a woman to think that after being pregnant for 9 months, waking up one morning and deciding, nah, I'm done with this. I think I changed my mind. But the notion that you could suddenly have an abortion in the 9th month just because you wanted to, or for some bogus medical reason, like you have a headache or something, is that possible under this amendment?
It's asinine, it's insulting, as you said, and it's not. That's never the case, it's never been the case, never will be the case. First of all, we're talking about, in those cases, that never exists. They don't exist. That doesn't happen. It will never happen. It doesn't happen. But when you look at some of these situations, when it is later in the pregnancy, not that late, not that far along, never have been. But when you do get later on in pregnancy, it's when people are having some of those tests and they find out that there are fetal abnormalities, that a child may have hydrocephaly. They may have things that make them incompatible with life outside of the womb. Those tests come farther than 15 weeks. They'll come at 20 weeks. And so families have had to make terrible decisions. You see baby Milo in the middle of the state who had a horrific life of 90 minutes, gurgling for air and a mother having to live through a pregnancy knowing that her child is going to have a painful, horrific death, having to explain that to a toddler at home, and has no ability to make a decision that's right for her, a child that was desperately wanted, again, and making an appropriate decision, medical decision for her family. Those things never happen. It's insulting, it's asinine, and it's wrong.
When we come back, an update on last week's show about the politics of climate change. Stay with us.